Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? Well, I don't know about fairest, but I do believe that Disney is the wisest of them all. I know, right? It sounds ridiculous, because after all, they're an evil cash cow cult. It's bad for the brain. And according to studies such as Psychology and Psychiatry Journal 2018, we should limit our children's exposure to such nonsense. And believe me, I did. Growing up, I had a rough childhood, and I depended heavily upon the fantasy of a prince coming and whisking me away and having a happily ever after. And it never happened for me. So when my daughter was born, I limited her exposure to this, the Disney empire, until I caved and I took her to see Frozen when she was 3. And something happened to me. And I realized that there was more to this Disney thing than met the eye. And I decided to deconstruct it to better understand what was going on. And that's what I'm here to tell you guys today, to convince you why you should know you are a Disney princess. Some of you are checking out on me right now. Just because you're male does not mean that this isn't important for you. According to Coin's Pretty as a Princess 2016, we are in a hyper-masculine media, and the Disney princesses help to diffuse that. So listen up. I like to talk about the equation for happiness that Disney has taught us. I'm going to deconstruct that for you today using 3 examples so you can better understand what I'm talking about. First, I like to introduce you to the anima and the animus. According to Chow, Peter, and Jeffrey 2018, the anima is the female aspects of the male psyche, and the animus is the male aspects of the female psyche. Now, why is this important? Because even though the sexes seem very different on the outside, we're very similar inside. Everyone sitting in this room right now has both feminine and masculine testosterone and estrogen. And we have both male and female aspects to our personas. So it's very important to understand your inner opposite sex. Carl Jung was the creator of the anima and animus, and he states that the anima plus the animus equals a healthy, balanced relationship with yourself or with someone else. For today's examples, I'd like to change that to something we are all familiar with. Princess plus prince equals happily ever after. Now, we're going to take away this happily ever after, and I'd like to discuss what happens the day after happily ever after with each of our subjects today. First up, we have Belle, the intellectual. Belles are problem solvers, they love a challenge, and they have a need to be right. So what happens the day after happily ever after for a Belle? Well, she finds that the beast hasn't changed at all. And no matter what she does and how hard she studies, she can't find the answer to that in her book. This leaves Belles prone to abusive relationships, victims of narcissistic abuse, and staying stuck because she's convinced that she can find the answer. Ariels, the rebels. They're adrenaline junkies by nature, they're explorers, but they are easily bored. What happens the day after happily ever after for an Ariel? Well, I'd like to think that she scuba dives back down to Daddy's kingdom, steals his trident, gives herself a pair of wings, and charts a course for Neverland, probably with Peter Pan. The Ariels are set up to face addiction problems, self-destructive habits, and deceptive behaviors. Our last example today is Cinderella, the caretaker. Cinderellas are nurturing, they're peacemakers, and they're orphans. This doesn't necessarily mean that their parents have died. This could just be being cut off from their family of origin. What happens to Cinderellas the day after happily ever after? Well, they find that all their needs have been met. The prince has solved all their problems, but they still feel hollow and empty because the value that they find in themselves is in service to others, and they no longer have that task. Cinderellas tend to be stay-at-home moms, loss of identity, and they tend to have codependent relationships. So what does all this mean now that we've deconstructed this? This helps us understand the balance. What can we do if we understand our Disney princess to find a balance in our lives, in ourselves, without outside influence? I like for you to imagine a person who doesn't need a partner to come in and solve all their problems for them, and who can still be a caretaker without being taken advantage of. I wonder what that would look like. I like for you to imagine someone who has a flair for adventure, who no longer needs to blow up their life every time they feel that itch. I wonder what that would look like. I'd like you to imagine someone who no longer needs the toxic relationships in their lives, who can kick the narcissist to the curb and know that they're the ruler of their own kingdom. Now here's the rub. According to the Journal of Communication Media Studies 2016, Disney is very imperfect. Even though they're evolving, there's still unhealthy gender stereotypes and the victimization of female protagonists. But that doesn't mean that this won't work for you. I'd like for you to think of Disney as a very simple starting point. We can start with a princess that we feel like we have a lot in common with, and then expand outward to understand more about ourselves and other characters in fantasy. The takeaway for you guys is for you to go out there and find your own adventure. Find your hero's journey. Realize what it is that you think that you need outside of yourself and become the ruler of your own